And my understanding of the chronology, and Madam Jeffrey, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but in August of 2018 is when there was a CSIS briefing.
Yeah, but
it
you're
was
not
in
answering the
September.
question,
It was in
Minister.
December
Excuse me,
of. It was in September of 2018 when the patent was discovered.
All right.
Yeah, that's not what I asked
We're
you,
out
though,
of time.
Minister.
I'm sorry, Dr. Ellis. Mr. Holland, appreciate your appearance today. Our hour has gone on a little bit over. We will now suspend for a few minutes while we line up for the back to work here and introduce our second panel. I'd now like to welcome David Vigneault, Director of the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, and the following officials: Adam Fisher, Director General Litigation and Disclosure; Leonard Stern, Deputy Director General Security Screening. Mr. Vigneault, you have 5 minutes for some opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Bonsoir tout le monde. Monsieur le Président.
Good evening, everyone. Mr. Chairperson, members of the committee, it's an honour to join you today and have the opportunity to contribute to your discussion on the matters revealed in the Winnipeg lab documents, and more broadly on the importance of protecting Canada's research from foreign interference and espionage. My goal today is to provide some clarity on CSIS's role in protecting our research through its screening mandate, intelligence collection and advice, and stakeholder engagement. I'd also welcome the opportunity to provide clarity on CSIS's disclosure requirements and processes, and how we are working to maximise transparency while protecting sensitive information.
Well aware, Canada's research sector is often targeted by foreign threat actors seeking to advance their interests at our expense. This can take many forms, from covertly influencing research agendas or peer review processes, to engaging in funding arrangements where details about the source of funds can be obscured or misrepresented. Through deceptive partnerships and collaborations, vital research and novel intellectual property is stolen. The PRC is by far the greatest perpetrator of these activities. Needless to say, as state actors become more sophisticated, these threats become harder to identify and to counter. It is therefore imperative that Canadians work together. This effort begins with informed and transparent discussions among and within all levels and branches of government, as well as with communities, academia, and businesses. As a committed partner in this effort, CSIS continues to investigate, provide advice to the government, and where appropriate, take measures to reduce threats. This work includes close collaborations with other government departments. For example, CSIS leverages its unique tools and access to provide thorough security assessments to requesting departments on individuals who require access to classified Government of Canada information or sensitive sites. This is one of the tools used to protect Canada's research infrastructure against insider threats. Parmi les autres outils figurent.
Other tools include stakeholder engagement, which, through education and knowledge dissemination, builds resilience against foreign interference and espionage, and thus ensures that the government investments do not inadvertently advance the research of hostile states in sensitive areas. While, as an intelligence service, CSIS needs to be able to protect its own intelligence in order to fulfil its mandate, CSIS has also actively been taking measures to increase transparency with Canadians through increased public engagement with communities and institutions on national security issues. CSIS has briefed more than 200 organisations and 1,000 individuals across Canada who are now well informed about possible threats, which has provided them with the tools to protect themselves, their research and their employees. CSIS also exercises transparency through regular, proactive and responsive disclosures of information. In the case of the Winnipeg lab documents, CSIS worked collaboratively with the panel of arbiters to maximise transparency through sanitization, including by summarising certain redactions to provide unclassified information. This resulted in the publication of a greater amount of national security information than previously released. The remaining redactions were approved by the panel, who recognised that their release could be injurious to Canada's national security.
National security is not static, but rather evolves over time. With the passage of time, these assessments may change. This is why CSIS dedicates subject matter experts to review documents line by line irrespective of their initial classification, to maximize transparency to Parliament and Canadians. The PRC has been bold in its attempts to threaten Canada's security, prosperity, and research through strategic espionage and foreign interference. To counter these threats, CSIS is continuously implementing lessons in how we respond to the constantly evolving threat environment. This includes increasing transparency with Canadians, and also through increased openness and willingness to release as much information as possible to processes such as this one. Finally, I will note that I cannot publicly comment on operational matters and requirements in order to protect the safety and security of Canadians. Nonetheless, I welcome this opportunity for a frank and transparent discussion to the extent possible and will be happy to answer your question. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Director Vigneault. I should note we are now rejoined by Ms. Lanceman. Good to have you there on the screen. And for our first round of questioning, we'll go to Dr. Ellis again for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, gentlemen, for being here. Specifically related to the National Microbiology Lab, is it true that in August of 2018, CSIS provided a briefing to National Microbiology Lab security officials?
Mr. Chair, absolutely. The CSIS, as part of its effort to make sure to increase resilience against threats posed by a number of foreign actors, we engage in proactive discussions with the Public Health Agency, including the National Microbiology Lab, about threats and indicators of insider threats. And so that was a very important and very useful discussion in 2018.
Thank you very much. And through you, Chair, to you again, Mr. Vigneault, I'm not sure how much you may or may not want to comment on this, but is it not true that the SDG of the National Microbiology Lab brought the names of two Chinese scientists forward to CSIS at that time?
My understanding, Mr. Chair, is that these discussions took place, a few weeks after that discussion, but it was generated by the initial discussion. So we received names of two individuals, the two individuals in question here, yes.
Thank you very much. And through you, Chair, I'm not entirely sure, Mr. Vigneault, if you're quite aware of the timelines, but I'll ask you anyway. That would then lead us all to believe that there were concerns about Drs. Chu and Chang before the discovery of the two patents in China in the PRC registered under Dr. Chu's name. Is that true, sir?
Mr. Chair, my understanding is that, yes, there were some initial concerns that were brought forward by PIAC and the NML to CSIS. And as a result, we started further investigation. And it's as a result of those investigations that we discovered the information about the patent.
Thank you very much. Through you, Chair, is there any more information about the nature of the exact concerns that officials brought to CSIS back in August of 2018 with respect to Drs. Chu and Chang?
Mr. Chair, I don't have any other details at this point, no.
Sir, through you, Chair, is that something that you could provide to the committee in writing?
Mr. Chair, I will absolutely endeavor to see what we can do. Of course, there will be limitations over what has already been disclosed through the process. But if there is more information that we can share, we will do so.
Thank you very much. And through you, Chair, to you, Mr. Vigneault, given the fact that I realize there are security concerns around this, but we had asked the minister previously about other security assessments or investigations ongoing with 1,000 Talents program or 1,000 Talents program like. I understand there's a new name for that program potentially for any scientist working at any government labs in Canada. Is there currently an investigation going on with respect to that?
So, Mr. Chair, as I mentioned in my initial comments, there are limits of what I can disclose publicly. What I would, if it's helpful, what I could tell the member is that the 1,000 Talent programs is something that we're keenly aware of, we're quite concerned with, and different iteration and different way that the PRC, or for that matter, other countries would try to use these types of programs, is something that CSIS investigates fairly thoroughly, and we work with our international partners to better understand those dynamics. But unfortunately, I'm not at liberty to discuss more specific details.
Thank you very much. And through you, Chair, Mr. Vigneault, are you at liberty to say, is CSIS aware of any TTP-like scientists working in Canadian labs at the current time?
Mr. Chair, unfortunately, my previous comments would apply to this question as well.
Fair enough. I appreciate that. You know, one of the things that we knew, the minister talked a lot about this, was that due process is more important than national security. Obviously, your lens perhaps is a little bit different, sir, than that of the minister. Do you share those comments?
Mr. Chair, I did not have the opportunity to listen to all of the minister's previous comments, but what I can tell you is that as an intelligence service, but working in a democratic environment governed by the rule of law, we are, of course, keenly focused, as per our mandate, to investigate all threats to national security, and we try to do that very thoroughly. But we also would be mindful that, you know, Canadians are entitled to due process and different procedures. So in the case of a security screening assessment, our role is very clear, is we investigate and we provide advice to the requesting department, who are the owner of the decision at the end of the process.
Thank you. And through you, Chair, I guess, sir, I might suggest things were a bit different. Things had evolved at the point of early in 2019 that this scientist's computer was actually mirrored, in my understanding, from the information we have in the briefing. Yet the institution, the National Microbiology Lab that scientist worked for, allowed a very deadly pathogen, probably two pathogens, Ebola and Henipavirus, to be transferred to a now existing national, a level 4 lab in the PRC, the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Sir, in your assessment of threat and security, does that make any sense?
Well, Mr. Chair, I think, you know, the specific dynamic of when and how and under what authority those samples were transferred have been looked at by this committee, and I would argue that the members of this committee have more specific knowledge than CSIS on the very aspect of that. But what I can tell you is that this is an area of great concern for CSIS, that when we see any way that directly, indirectly, covertly or not, that we see the PRC being able to potentially increase their threat activity against Canada and against other Western nations and their neighbors. So that's the prism through which we look at these issues at CSIS.
Thank you, Dr. Ellis. That's your time. We'll go down to Mr. Francescatos for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to all of you for being here tonight. Mr. Vigneault, to what extent can we say that every democracy is dealing with these kinds of issues in some shape or form? That is, the implications for national security when we look at issues of research and research collaboration.
So, Mr. Chair, I will use a very specific example to illustrate that point. My colleagues and I, heads of the Five Eyes Intelligence Services, we took the unprecedented avenue of meeting together in public for the first time in our history in October of last year at Stanford University, in the context of talking about innovation and the need to secure that innovation for the well-being and the prosperity and the security of our countries in the future. And we had a common assessment, the head of the Five Eyes, that specifically the work of the PRC against all of us, against essentially any organization that has information of know-how that the PRC is interested in, is at risk, because it is an institutional approach through the talent programs, through covert espionage activities, through open arrangements and investments to try to get as much information. The problem, again, is not to do that in what is done in overt ways, not the problem. However, in the case of the PRC, there is a very specific set of conditions that apply. And the Chinese Communist Party has been very clear that their goal is to have, for example, the most advanced and modern military by 2049. And in order to do so, the president of China, Xi Jinping, who is also the general secretary of the Communist Party, chairs a committee of military civil fusion. So all of the information, know-how, and data that they acquire, there is an institutional approach to try to leverage this and turn this into a military advantage. And so from that point of view, Mr. Franciscados, you're right to say that it's not just Canada that is under threat, but, any other country that, has something that the PRC in this case is interested in acquiring.
Thank you very much. What would you say is the message to post-secondary institutions? I represent London, Ontario, or help to represent London, Ontario in the House of Commons. Western University is there in London. We have universities throughout the country that look at medical research, look at research in general, and collaboration is key to that research in so many different cases. What is the message that is being relayed either through the Five Eyes more generally, but also what would you say here to universities who look at situations like this and wonder about the security implications for research?
So, Mr. Chair, this is one of the area that we have to be very careful about how we engage in these discussions. Canada is a prosperous country because we have excellent know-how, universities, and research, and this is the basis for our prosperity. And so we have to be careful not to stifle that innovation because we will not be where we need to be in 10, 15, 20 years. And so that innovation needs to be protected. However, the world has changed, and the number of actors also have changed in the process, and the way they are engaging in these activities has evolved to the point where some of these activities are indeed threats to our country. And so one of the most important ways specifically to work with university is to engage in open dialogue, is to share information with them. We have published unclassified documents that are going at the core of this. In the past year, we have engaged directly, visited 13 universities across the country, and we are part of organizations called, we work with the research university in the country, and we work with Universities Canada to share our information, meet with academia, with students' body, with academic administrators, to essentially share with them what we know, share with them the concerns that we may have, and work in collaboration to accomplish these two objectives: great innovation in our universities, but protecting our national security at the same time. Both need to be achieved.
And you said, beyond universities now, you said that there were around 200 organizations that CSIS has briefed. What kinds of organizations are we looking at here? What is the nature of those briefings? The reason I ask that question is I wonder if there's particular sectors that you're worried about that are more susceptible to threats.
Yeah. Mr. Chair, indeed, there are a number of specific sectors we're more concerned with. Quantum technology, biopharma, aviation. We're looking at anything related to cyber. Our agriculture is of area of concern because we're developing very innovative approaches in our country. And so we're meeting with universities, as I mentioned. We're also meeting with industry associations. We're publishing unclassified documentations and try to make them as available to possible. If it's of interest, I can say that we're also working because we've been talking about foreign interference, and that is one part of the element of the same kind of approach by the PRC. Espionage and foreign interference often go, or two elements of the same strategy. And so we've been engaging very significantly with the diaspora in the country to make sure that we are seen as part of the solution with the diaspora, that we share our information, we listen to their concerns, we listen to how we can better interact with them, which will be relevant. And I would say that work of this committee also are very important because it increasing the knowledge and the know-how of what the know-how that we have that we can share through you, and it's through these different efforts that will increase the resilience of Canada and Canadians.
Thank you, Director. We'll now go to Mr. Bergeron. Next 6 minutes are yours. Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson, and good evening, gentlemen. Thank you for being with us here today. It's really highly appreciated, your attendance here. So a couple of moments ago, I mentioned an article released in the Journal de Montréal on the 29th of January 2024, which stated that as of 2010, you alerted the government regarding an increasingly aggressive attitude on the part of China concerning intelligence activities. Now, what we've observed is that the government was slow to react and to cotton on to this message. The minister even said to us a couple of moments ago that up until recently, the government of Canada relied on voluntary disclosures by employees to get a very clear idea of their quote-unquote pedigree and any ties they might have had with other institutions. Now, of course, I don't want to embarrass you, or put you on the spot, but is it your opinion that the government should have put in place verification, background screening measures earlier on when it comes to high-level laboratories and facilities, level 4 facilities such as the Winnipeg lab? Thank you very much, Mr. Bergeron. Your question is very interesting and addresses a number of key issues. Now, one of those issues is this: how things have evolved over recent years, specifically since Xi Jinping came into power, and how China has evolved over time in terms of how aggressive it is and how it flouts international law. For example, the 2015-2016 decision of the International Penal Court on the South China Sea, where an unequivocal decision was handed down and China decided to ride roughshod over it. So that was one of the triggers in 2015. For example, this speaks to a very deliberate trajectory on the part of the Chinese government, and Chinese legislation has also evolved over time. For example, the 1,000 Talents program has become highly institutionalized. There's legislation that's been enacted. In some ways, it paints China as quite open. In 2015, 2016, some legislation forces Chinese worldwide to collaborate with their intelligence services. And another example, the development and growth of the United Front work. I'm sorry, the acronym in French escapes me, but it's the UFW. And they attempt to influence and control the Chinese diaspora worldwide and to wield influence over other countries in order to promote Chinese interests. So the UFW and the 1,000 Talents programs and the evolution of the threat posed by China, all of this must be factored in to what we do as an intelligence agency vis-a-vis China. And that is why it's important to look at the information we have in 2024, look at it through the lens of 2010, and look back retrospectively and try and determine what we could have done at the time. That's a helpful exercise. And a final observation, Mr. Bergeron, given my collaborative work with my counterparts across the world concerning Chinese espionage and foreign interference, all players have evolved over the past years in terms of their assessment of that kind of behaviour, and I know that Canada has been part and parcel of that development too. When you testified before the committee in March 2021 and you spoke about the relationship between your institution and universities, you mentioned that CSIS has a close dialogue with the universities and academia, and you'd like heightened collaboration. In March 2024, Radio-Canada CBC observed that Saskatchewan University will host the first non-government level 4 laboratory in Canada. Now, in light of your agency's limitations when it comes to information sharing, how do you intend to collaborate with such a high-level laboratory that is not the purview of the Government of Canada? Response. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson. It's, again, a very good question, and Mr. Bergeron is alluding to the limitations of the CSIS Act when it comes to information sharing. Now, the Minister of Public Safety, Minister Leblanc, observed that there are consultations that have taken place in Canada, but he would be willing to move amendments to the legislation itself, he has indicated, and we'd like to see that happen because this is one of the shortcomings of our system. And when it comes to the lab in Winnipeg, I can tell you that we've had discussions over quite a protracted period to talk about information sharing and about broadening awareness. So within the limitations that are imposed upon us under the Act, we are striving to, and we were able to enter into a dialogue with academia, and we indeed hope to enhance that already existing dialogue. Thank you very much.
We'll now go to Mr. Desjardins for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I want to thank the witnesses for being present today, and of course for your immense work in keeping Canadians safe and all the work that your staff does to ensure that our continued work to make it safer continues, which is why we're all here today. And so it's a question I want to ask, and similar to what Mr. Frederick was mentioned in terms of the sectors that are under threat. I know coming from Alberta, this has been a conversation we've had for a long time, particularly with the development of our oil sands. In Alberta oil sands, as you may know, in 2012 and even previous to that, there was an economic policy by the then Conservative Party to find ways to sell off assets in Alberta, particularly our access to oil sand projects. CNRL, Canadian Natural Resources, was unfortunately sold to Nexen. Nexen was sold to controlled companies by China, and today that's the same. How much of a threat is China and the the PRC to our oil sands and to the production development of research for those petroleum products?
Mr. Chair, this is the question is interesting because what you're looking at is two things. One is the control and ownership of a fixed asset, if you want. But also, you meant your question, you talk about the development of the know-how and new innovation. So I would make the distinction between something that, you can control, which is, the asset, like you cannot, in the middle of the night come in covertly and, take it over. So I think all of the knowing and understanding, not just the PRC, but other countries as well, what their intent is to have the right legislation to make sure that you're able to protect through the Investment Canada Act, amongst other things. But the very important question as well is, the development of the know-how, the innovation. When you look at some of the carbon capture, there is, very innovative things happening in Alberta and other parts of the country. And so what we know is that if it's of interest or of the PRC, or some other countries as well, there will be an ability to try to overtly, sometimes through direct engagement, but also through other means, including covert espionage, to try to acquire this know-how and this information. And what we have to be very mindful of, and this is what we do at CSIS, is to try to look at it, the very specific activities, but also to zoom out and to try to understand what is the cumulative impact of some of these issues and see what is the consequence for Canada's national security now, but also in the future. And this is the advice we try to provide the government.
No, that's a fantastic answer. Just to be able to frame that, at the time of these policies being in existence, I would assume that they were existing in 2012 when China took over Alberta's oil companies, correct?
Mr. Chair, as I mentioned, what we've seen is, some of these conditions existed, but, since 2012, to 2024, there's been a very significant evolution, and there's been a couple of pivotal moments, and one of them has been the ascension to power of Xi Jinping, but also a number of other steps that have been taken, including the publication of very specific strategies like Made in China 2025, and their 5-year goals, strategies, which sometimes very overt. They say this is where we want to be. We want to dominate this sector, that sector. And so I think that evolution that we've seen, since 2013, some of these elements were there, some of these dynamics were there in 2012, but we've seen a dramatic acceleration.
No, I can see that, and I hope you can see my curiosity and the very problematic connection that comes to mind when I think of the control of Alberta's oil assets and petroleum, which is, an immense resource we have here in Canada, but particularly in Alberta. But to also know that your concern of issuing the potential of, especially we're looking at the PRC's mandate to have the strongest, most technologically advanced military by 2049, I believe you said. Those two things, in my mind, present a credible risk. That if they have control over physical resource assets like petroleum, incredibly important asset to war and military, that they would also then have access to the information that supplies it. Do you believe that the ownership of these companies should be challenged, especially now in light of what we're seeing in terms of a very aggressive modes of information and hostile actions?
Mr. Chair, that's the question I honestly will have to reflect upon in the last number of years. The specific ownership of those resources has not been as much top of our agenda. I will reflect on this, Mr. Desjardins, and maybe be able to bring back something more intelligent to share with you.
No, I would appreciate that, and I look forward to hearing from that. Maybe you can supply that in writing at a certain time to this committee when it's appropriate for you to review that information and supply an opinion or response. I understand I have 30 seconds, so I want to be able to ask a question that I asked the minister in relation to impacts of this study and other studies related to the Winnipeg labs, of our relationship with our partners across the globe, particularly Five Eyes and NATO, whether or not that serious breach of information presented a credible risk by our partners, and did they present that risk to you as a question or in ways of recommending ways to partner to reduce that risk?
So, Mr. Chair, as I mentioned, we're working extremely closely with not just our Five Eyes partners, but a number of other extremely sophisticated intelligence services around the world. CSIS has over 300 relationships around the world with intelligence services. And this is one of the very significant issues we're talking about. Each country has challenges when it comes to penetration of institutions and espionage activities. And this is one of the reasons why we share so much at the classified level together, is to collectively be more resilient, learn from each other, including, you can be sure that, a case like this, the lessons that we will learn as an intelligence service, we will be sharing that with our partners to make sure, again, that, we raise the bar and that we make it harder for hostile actors to threaten our well-being.
Thank you, Director.
Thank you, Director Vigneault. We'll now go to Mr. Chong for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. CSIS has assessed that foreign interference from the PRC is a serious threat to Canada. I just want to quote what CSIS has assessed. Quote, "Foreign interference is one of the most important strategic threat to Canada's national security. It poses a significant threat to the integrity of our democratic institutions, social cohesion, economy and long-term prosperity, and fundamental rights and freedoms," end quote. Now, you mentioned earlier in your testimony that espionage is not exactly the same thing as foreign interference, but it's very closely related. How do you assess the PRC's espionage activities in Canada in terms of threat?
So, Mr. Chair, because of the organized, systematic approach and capabilities of the PRC, we assess that the PRC is the most significant espionage threat against our country. As I mentioned, and some of that is, Mr. Chong will know that, is it's the dynamic is somewhat similar to the foreign interference in the sense that you have a continuum of activities because so the intent is very clear. And one of them, for example, is to have the most sophisticated modern military in 2049. It's to have through these 5-year programs to have very dominate certain aspect of the economy in the future, and so the intent is very clear. The means can vary from the overt to the very much covert. And so the dynamic that we see in terms of foreign interference, we see the same thing. We see legitimate means of engaging in our economy that are absolutely appropriate. And I've talked to different companies who are essentially telling us that they know that when they get into some deals that they will lose intellectual property, very sophisticated, up to and including very covert espionage.
Thank you for that answer. You mentioned earlier in your testimony that CSIS is concerned with the 1,000 Talents program. How do you assess the 1,000 Talents program with respect to government scientists? In other words, do you think it is appropriate for Government of Canada scientists to participate in the 1,000 Talents program or any of the 200 or so other recruitment programs of the People's Republic of China?
So, Mr. Chair, I will reiterate what I said earlier in the sense that we, in these types of cases, we do an assessment of the generic nature of those talent programs. That's one thing. And then at the request of agencies, we will do the screening of very specific individuals. And then we provide that assessment, that advice to the host agency for them to determine. And I think it's the reason I reiterate this point, Mr. Chong, is that there might be some circumstances in which, it is totally transparent. It is an activity that would benefit Canada as well as, in this case, China. So there might be some cases, and so I would not want to be categorical to say 100%
Understood.
no.
So it could be appropriate in some cases and not in others.
But very transparent,
Okay.
and that is one of the key issues at play.
Understood. Now, we know that Dr. Chu clandestinely and corruptly cooperated and collaborated with the government and the military of the People's Republic of China, and also received payment for travel within the People's Republic of China from both of those entities, and did not declare that with the Government of Canada. One of those entities that she clandestinely collaborated with was the Wuhan Institute of Virology. The Wuhan Institute of Virology is not on the list of named research organizations of the Government of Canada, so it is technically possible for a government entity to collaborate with that organization. Do you assess that to be an acceptable security risk, particularly in light of the fact that, according to public sourced reports, Dr. Chu is working at the Wuhan Institute of Virology or working with scientists there as we presently speak?
Mr. Chair, I would say that the list of entities that are, have been listed by the government as problematic is a very welcome approach, because again, it speaks to Mr. Fragiskatos here when you asked this question earlier about how do we work with people. Giving them more information about what might be appropriate or not is very important. And in this case, listing these organizations and telling them why it might be a problem helps people make their own decisions. So I think, we CSIS have provided advice to ICED and public safety, who have come up with that list. In the specific case of the Wuhan Institute, again, there might be legitimate reasons why, for the benefit of Canada, that would be appropriate to work with them. And so I think it would be useful in this case if there were to be any kind of such arrangement to ask specifically what kind of due diligence has been made on these.
Just a very quick
Mr.
final.
Chong, I'm
quick,
sorry, sir, you're out of time. You are out of time. We'll have to go now to Mr. Erskine-Smith for 5 minutes.
Thanks very much, Chair. As the director of CSIS, you are one of the people in this country who thinks about national security more than most. And so when you look at the timeline, you reflect on the timeline here, there have been accusations of delay and inappropriate due diligence. And so as of August, there's a lab employee who identifies 2 colleagues who might be targeted by the PRC. September 2018, PHAC, through some due diligence, becomes aware of a patent filed by Dr. Chu. You got later that year, December 2018, a security consultant is engaging in a fact-finding and ultimately reports to PHAC in March of 2019. The RCMP escorts the individuals out of the lab in July of 2019. When you reflect on that timeline, Do you think PHAC acted with appropriate due diligence?
Mr. Chair, I think that this chronology is very instructive because now with what we know in 2024, it's easy to look back at the events of the day and try to, with the knowledge that we have. I was talking to my colleagues who are responsible for the screening branch earlier today. We're looking at those dates and so on, and my experts were telling me that as far as the case go, this one was very quick to be able to come to fruition. And one of the way, because I know there were some questions about due diligence and due process, but one of the things that is important is how do you start to mitigate the threat significantly? And so when these individuals were walked out and not having access to their information and the lab itself, this is one way you mitigate the threat while the rest of the investigation takes place. So I will reiterate, Mr. Smith, that my expert colleagues have told me that they thought it was a fairly expeditious process.
I appreciate that. In your view, from a security vantage point, what more could PHAC have done? And I know because these individuals, I mean, we're talking about their employees from the early 2000s. This is not an infiltration operation. This is an operation where they are ultimately co-opted down the road of their careers, which strikes me as a more challenging thing to screen, all things considered. But I wonder what your view is as the director of CSIS. What more could and should PHAC have done in the circumstances to mitigate the risks that ultimately were realized?
Mr. Chair, the answer to the way I would try to answer this question is to say that, of course, as Mr. Erskine-Smith mentioned, we look at the issues, through a national security prism. And so one of the effort we try to do is to, share our knowledge, our expertise, and our concerns with our colleagues to make sure that they are looking, that one of the filters at which they look at issues within the organization is the national security aspect. And so increasing the culture of these organizations, the security culture of these organizations is one thing that, we're very keen in doing. And so it is more a generic comment as opposed to a specific one looking back at times that any organization that, we can work with more closely to increase what I would refer to as a connective tissue between national security and their business, I think makes Canada and these organizations more resilient.
Can you pause that? That's a very good answer because I was amazed actually. I read the April 2020 security assessment, the first security assessment, and it's pretty thin because there's an interview. Dr. Chu lies straight up to your officials. And then mere months later, June 30th, there's a second security assessment. It's incredible what your agency was able to glean and document in between those a mere matter of months. And that close, especially at a level 4 lab, that close relationship between CSIS and a level 4 lab is essential, no?
Yes, Mr. Chair, absolutely. As I mentioned, the evolution of the threat activity of the PRC and others, other countries against Canada has been such that we had to change our approach at CSIS. We have to be both collecting very covertly intelligence and secrets that the government, the parliament essentially to the CSIS Act is asking us to do. But then at the same time is we need to increase our transparency because the ecosystem in Canada has changed because of those threat actors. And so when you look, Mr. Erskine-Smith, at the dynamic in the lab at the time, the dynamic with the organization, I think what you see is a both realization of that threat, but also a number of people who started to be tweaking to security issues much more significantly. And that's what, again, I commend the work of this committee because I think, through this work, more Canadians will be thinking about these issues. And this is the only way through more transparency that will increase our resiliency. I would say that...
Sorry,
I'm running out of time, so 2 questions.
Sorry, Mr. Yeah, I know, but time's up. Sorry, it goes by very
quickly. Time's up. All right. Well, thanks.
Time's up. Mr. Bergeron, 2.5 minutes for you, sir.
Alors, 2 questions. 2 questions right off the bat, Mr. Chair. Now, if CSIS thinks that a high-level researcher in Canada is a member of the 1,000 Talents program, will it intervene? And what about in 2018? The lab was supposed to have cutting edge technology that would be protected from that kind of threat or intrusion over a 25-year trajectory. Do you think that you could achieve that more quickly? Mr. Chairperson, about the 25-year trajectory, I'm not aware of the details of that strategy. What I do understand of the government's strategy, however, is that this will be taking place over a number of years. But of course, we try to manage the biggest threats proactively. Your first question about the 1,000 Talents program. Are we aware of high-level researchers that are part of that program? Response. Yes, Mr. Chairperson. Yes, sometimes our screening program or our intelligence colleagues become aware of that kind of involvement. And were we aware of an individual being part of the 1,000 Talents program, either from China or another country, yes, we would intervene, certainly. Thank you.
Mr. Bergeron, I still have you down for a minute.
Il me reste une minute. Mon Dieu.
Oh, I have a minute left. My gosh, how luxurious. Well,
C'est ça, mais je...
Indeed, Mr. Chairperson. Well, we learned that one of the things that the researchers, or the two researchers, was criticised over was the fact that they had collaborators work in the lab without any escort. How did that actually occur? And in your opinion, is that commonplace, that kind of practice, or has it been tightened up since then? Response. To my knowledge, Mr. Chairperson, lessons have been learned, and our PHAC colleagues have very aggressively implemented those lessons with a view to plugging those gaps when it comes to security. And to my knowledge, those practices are no longer commonplace. What I can tell you, however, is that espionage and counter-espionage is such that as our techniques and intelligence gathering strategies are developed and become efficient and effective, well then our opponents and adversaries will tweak their strategies in response. So it's kind of like the cat and the mouse, and we can't rest on our laurels and think, oh, well, this is done and dusted and we can move on. That's why I always emphasize the importance of a partnership and dialogue between national security experts, such as CSIS, and other organizations, because things evolve, the techniques, the strategies, espionage techniques evolve too, and we need to keep the pace.
2.5 minutes for you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I do want to now turn to what I believe to be like an overarching concern related to China, which is the potential of China organizing global allies towards such ends. And I know the mandate of this committee is more narrowly specific to China, but my concern is largely on how China could be leveraging its state supporters to meet the ends that you described at the very onset of our meeting today. The greatest potential and the greatest risk I perceive from your comments of today's meeting is this plan towards a larger military, which, of course, in New Democrats' perspective is bad for peace. Of course, when you have larger and larger militaries continuing to gather, it makes an inevitable situation likely. And so it's a major concern, I think, not just for Canadians, but for the globe writ large. How concerning is China's relationship with other state actors towards what could be a really serious potential collision course with NATO and our allies?
Mr. Chair, one of the significant byproduct, if you want, of Russia's invasion of Ukraine has been a rapprochement between the People's Republic of China and Russia. We're talking about two dictatorship. We're talking about two authoritarian system that they collaborate because they see an interest in doing so for each one of them, and so the dynamic of an increased military collaboration between the PRC and Russia is of concern. We see also a rapprochement with North Korea. And so when you start to look at at the security dynamics in that part of the world, we start to see a number of indicators going in the wrong direction. For Canada specifically, we see the PRC has declared itself and invented a new concept. They declared themselves a near Arctic state. Did not exist before, but now it exists in their, at least in their nomenclature, and it's for the specific purpose of trying to increase their capabilities of operating in the north, including the Canadian Arctic. They see the economic potential with climate change and the opening of sea routes in the north, but also as a military component of this. So from a Canadian point of view, we are concerned about specifically using this example of what is a potential direct impact on Canada's security now and in the future, but also, as you mentioned, Mr. Desjardins, the question of the global stability or instability that is created by military arrangements, military sharing of know-how, sharing of equipment. In that part of the world. So it is of a significant concern now, but also in the future.
Thank you, Director.
Both. Now we have. We're going to take care of our final 2 5-minute periods. So it'll be Mr. Chong first, and then Mr. Nakvi to wrap us up. Mr. Chong.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. The Government of Canada outsources and contracts to a lot of outside individuals and companies. ArriveCan obviously has been in the news recently. But one of the things that surprised me in reading the documents we received was that a private company did some parts of the investigation. Why is a private company, in this case Presidia Security Consulting, doing security investigations for the Government of Canada? What is your view of that? And secondly, what is the relationship between CSIS and this private company in respect of these investigations?
So, Mr. Chair, I think it's an interesting point in the sense that some organizations may have more in-house capabilities to be able to do some of these sophisticated investigations. In this case, I would suggest that, Mr. Chung, I don't know if you've had the chance to ask a question to PIAC, why did they do that? But in my experience, that has been one of the issues, that people do not have enough expertise in some specific area. But I'm speaking in a general manner here. I don't know. There is no relationship between CSIS and such an organization for the simple purpose of that there's nothing we can share with them. We would not be sharing our techniques and methods and our information with them. I would say that, again, at the general level, there might be, again, scenarios in which it could be useful. We have some private companies who have a lot of very good expertise in niche area of investigation, so that might be useful. But that will, of course, need to be complemented, especially if you're talking about government assets, government information, with a government investigation, and this is where CSIS would have to come into play. And, of course, in the context of potential criminality, our colleagues at the RCMP need to be engaged.
So, in other words, the department and the agency is responsible for carrying out the investigation with their own resources, and if they don't have them, then that's why they contracted a private company to do it. Is that, I would have thought that if there was a security concern within PIAC, that they would have contacted Government of Canada authorities to conduct the investigation, such as CSIS, the RCMP, rather than hiring a private contractor to do the investigative work to gather the information.
So, Mr. Chair, our mandate at CSIS, is fairly clear in this circumstance. We would be investigative of the national security threat, and we would be doing the security screening aspect of it. But everything that in between those arcs, with the administrative portion of it, we would not be equipped to do so, and that would not be appropriate. And again, I just want to reiterate, I was making a general comment when I said that, so I don't know if the rationale for PIAC.
Okay, so I have another related question. So CSIS does intelligence assessments. So if an individual wants to get clearance to go into the Winnipeg lab, CSIS will do the intelligence assessment on that individual and provide advice to the department or agency. Normally within the machinery of government of Canada, who is responsible for granting that security clearance? Is it the deputy minister or head of the agency, such as the president of PIAC, or who is it normally? And can those authorities be delegated?
So, Mr. Chair, the authority clearly through the government security screening policy, the authority rests with the deputy head of each organization.
The deputy head.
The deputy head of each organization. In terms of delegation of authority, I believe it is possible.
So in the case of PIAC, the authority which is responsible for the NML, it would be the president of PIAC that would be responsible for granting the security clearance.
Mr. Chair, the authority is indeed through the president or to the deputy head. Same thing with revocation.
Okay, understood. Thank you. And so my last question concerns a report. There's basically one level 4 lab in Canada. I know there's two parts of it. There's the animal side of it and there's the human side of it. But essentially, there is one level 4 facility in Canada in Winnipeg. One run by CFIA, the other run by PIAC. It's been reported last month that the University of Saskatchewan is interested in setting up a level 4 lab. So I have a very simple question. Do we have the state capacity in Canada to have another level 4 lab, particularly at a non-governmental institution, in light of the massive security breaches that we saw at the government's lab in Winnipeg?
So, Mr. Chair, I'll be very transparent here with member. This is not an issue where we CSIS have looked at it. I have not personally looked at the capacity the way you refer to it, Mr. Chong. What I can say is that in answering Mr. Bergeron's question, I mentioned that we do have already connections and engagement with the Saskatchewan entity that is looking to establish that. And I think, again, the work of this committee, if there's one thing that will come out of this, is that everybody will be even more aware and concerned, and I would expect diligent in their in the setting up and the security aspect of any such a lab.
So you think we should,
Mr. Chong, sorry, you are way out of time.
Thank you.
All right, to Mr. Nakvi for 5 minutes, please.
Chair, and thank you, Director, and Mr. Stern and Mr. Fisher for being here. Director, you spoke about the processes that went into in 2018, 2019, and it's your testimony that looking back, you feel that the matter was dealt with in a fairly expeditious manner. I want to ask you a question looking forward. Having seen this process and changing climate around safety and security as it relates to PRC, what would be your thoughts in terms of things that needs to happen to improve the processes around a lab 4 and other government apparatus that may deal with other foreign countries?
Mr. Chair, I think what we realize is that the dynamic in our countries have been changing for some time. There are a number of threat actors, fortunately, who are after what we have. They want what we have here, our know-how, our expertise, and our intellectual property. So I think, as I mentioned before, there's a number of different elements. One is you need to talk about these issues. You need to have, it cannot just be, in the confines of CSIS that, these issues are of concern. It should be part of a societal discussion that, unfortunately there are threats to our national security, and we need to talk about these. So that's one aspect. The second aspect is to make sure you create the right to use the expression I used before, connective tissue between different organizations. People need to know each other a little bit. People need to have confidence that, you know, if I have a concern, where do I go to? How do I engage in these discussions? Because we definitely do not have all of the answers. We do not know everything at CSIS. I'd like to think we know a few things. But at the same time, we need to have ourselves, but with many other federal government entities, but provincial, municipal, academic or institutions, research laboratories. We need to have areas where people will talk to each other. And so the last number of years, I've seen an increase in the number of those venues, organized venues, formal and informal, for the information exchange. And the last thing I would say is, as we say in French, je vais prêcher pour ma paroisse. It's important to make sure that, you know, the organizations dedicated to protecting national security have adequate capacity to do that, including through legislation.
So thank you. So my last question to you would be sort of encapsulating sort of those general themes that you just spoke about that should be kept in mind moving forward. Are there specific recommendations around improvement to rules and processes that you can provide as CSIS to this committee in writing that can help us in our report writing also in terms of what we saw and how we can improve things moving forward?
Mr. Chair, through you, I welcome the opportunity. I'll work with my colleagues, and we'll endeavor to provide some of our thoughts and potentially even be bold, you know, advice to the committee.
Okay. Thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Natke. That brings us to the close. We want to appreciate all of the questions and certainly our witnesses, Mr. Stern, Mr. Vigneault, and Mr. Fisher. I want to thank the clerk, the analysts, our interpreters, staff, and service staff. And with that, the session is adjourned.
Just
A quick point.
Yes, just a point of order. I noticed we're meeting Friday afternoon.
Yes, we are.
I also was told today that the only Wednesday slot available is 7:30 to 9:30 p.m. So I'm wondering if you just quickly canvass the members of the committee whether they want to meet on Friday afternoon or Wednesday evening. I'm agnostic, realizing it's actually quite a late Wednesday slot. I thought it was earlier in the day. So we just quickly canvass.
Let's, can we actually have the clerk follow up with everybody
Sure.
and get everybody's thoughts and feelings on that?
Sure,
We'll
that's
go with, we'll certainly go with Friday this week.
Okay.
And, you know, of course,
Sure.
we'll
See about
accede
next
to
week.
the wishes of the committee, even though it is, you know, Wednesday evening would be a horrible imposition on your chair.
No.
You know, I mean, I don't want to play, you know, the big victim here, but.
Okay, thank you, Mr.
But we'll
Chair.
leave that to your conscience, sir. All right? With that, meeting adjourned.